here I was, a BYU student. I was living in my parents' basement because we were really poor, and I was making $15 an hour. And then suddenly I get this Merrill Lynch paperwork saying that I'm worth $3 million. And I'm like, what the heck? I'm like, I don't feel rich because it was an all stock deal. So it was tied up in the
Okay.
stock. Right.
Okay.
And so, unfortunately, the timing of that sale then was that in 2000, the stock market started to crash and they bought
Right.
at an all time high of their stock.
Startups with Stu is a podcast for anyone living or wanting to live the startup life, either as a founder or a team member. Your host, Stuart Draper, was a 9-time Inc. 5000 honoree before age 40. This show dives deep into the exhilarating world of entrepreneurship with guests that are seeking advice from Stu for their startup or business owners that want to share their entrepreneurial journey. Listeners always walk away with actionable ideas of what to do to take their startup to the moon. Startup life can feel like a roller coaster ride. And with Startups with Stu, you're likely to turn your roller coaster ride into a rocket ship ride. Get ready to uncover the secrets to startup success from visionary founders and savvy investors who've transformed groundbreaking ideas into thriving ventures.
This episode is brought to you today by PodUp. PodUp.com is the leading all-in-one AI-powered podcasting software. If you've ever considered having a podcast, want to get started, go to podup.com and check it out. I produce my podcast, use a variety of tools and producers that help me get everything done that I'm doing. Podallies.com is the agency I choose. If you're interested in having a podcast, you don't want to do it yourself through podup.com, I highly recommend that you go check out podallies.com and schedule a strategy call with one of their production specialists. They will be able to help you and think through everything you need to before you get started on your journey as a podcaster.
Good day. It is so good to be with all of you here for another episode of Startups with Stu. Today, we have a guest that is a living legend in the digital marketing world. A little company called Bluehost is probably Dan Handy's biggest career win. But I'll let him share more of that story. Dan, thank you for being with me today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I appreciate it.
So, Dan, you have spent a lot of your career in the world of web hosting.
Yeah.
And as a founder and as an early team member at startups, including an early team member at Bluehost, tell us a little bit about your career path that got you to where you are today.
All right. So it all started when I, went to college, and it's kind of funny because I wasn't sure what to study. I went to BYU, and I was in computer science, and I was like, and then after 2 years of computer science, I was like, oh man, I don't think I'm that great of a programmer. I think I'm okay at this, but this doesn't feel right. Then I had a counselor suggest, why don't you look at the business school with an emphasis in information systems? I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. I didn't even know that existed. So I got into the business school, and I loved the business classes. BYU has a fantastic business school. And given my heavier technology background, then the information systems classes were pretty easy for me at that point. And so while I was doing that degree, and I found my niche, business married with technology. And I found out that's what I'm really good at. I'm good at marrying both worlds together, because a lot of hardcore technology guys aren't necessarily great at the business principles. Like, oh, let's just build this thing. And you're like, well, how does that make us money? Or how does he, and then the hardcore business guys always don't understand, they don't have a good technology background, understand the technology side of, well, why do we need to do that? Or why do we need to pay so much for this or whatever, right? So being able to marry the two together and create a functional company where both the business needs and technology needs are met, what became my expertise, right? So while I was still in college, and this was in 1996, at some point I decided I should probably get a job in computers, before I graduate. So I'm not like graduating with no experience. So I got a job first as a Clipper programmer at a telemarketing center, which I'm sure Clipper doesn't even exist anymore. And then I taught myself HTML. And then one day the guys in the sister company were like, "Hey, Dan, do you know HTML?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do." And so then I showed them a couple little websites that I made. So I started working at this little startup. It was called Direct Connect. And what we did was custom e-commerce things for companies. This is back in the day before there was any Shopify or any packaged e-commerce software. So you had to pretty much build everything from scratch, right? So we built different websites and e-commerce platforms for companies. They were all custom jobs. And then the owner, he owned this telemarketing center, and he also owned this little tiny startup that we were 4 guys, right, of the web stuff.
Yeah.
And he's like, "If you guys can make something of this, then I'll give you some ownership." So he gave us all some ownership. We're like, "Okay, great." So we came up with this idea to create, we looked around, and at the time, what was really popular back then was web hosting, and people trying to create pages and get pages up on the internet. And so free web hosting started becoming really popular. And if you were alive back then, you probably heard of places like GeoCities and AngelFire and like all of these ones that were popping up where people were creating their own page. This is before Facebook or MySpace or any of those things. So people, a lot of just wanted to create a page about anything, like their favorite hobby or whatever, right? So then they
to be able to find themselves, right? They're just like trying to see themselves.
Right.
I get to have my place online. And then, Dan, I wanted to hit pause real quick on this amazing story that's unfolding, and I can tell so much bigger and better things that all are starting to morph. And they're like the seed is just germinating here in your story. You pointed out something. You kind of went over something that I think I want to touch on. You taught yourself HTML.
Yes.
And you did it while you had another job that didn't need that skill.
Right. So oftentimes I've worked with college students, and this is probably the number one thing that I tell them is that if you're going into a career and you want to build a career, the actual experience in that career is so valuable that you need to work on that. So let me back up that story because the story actually contains a bigger thing. So I decided I worked for 2 years during college to pay the bills as a teacher training missionaries in Spanish, right? And then I liked that job a lot, but then I thought, well, I really need experience. So I told you I got a job working programming Clipper. I didn't tell you how I got that job. So let me back up just a second. So I started interviewing for some programming jobs, right? Because I'm like, I need a programming job, just entry level, super basic, $10 an hour back then, right? And they would interview me, and I get to the end, they'd be like, "You seem like a nice guy. You seem kind of smart, but you have no experience, so we're going to hire this guy." And I heard that like 5 times, and I was like, "Oh, this is so frustrating. I can't get a job." So I decided to create my own experience. So my brother had a copy of Visual Basic. I said, "Give me a copy of that." I loaded it on my computer, and I started just programming an actual program. I just made up a mythical like idea of like a CRM kind of system of like, if I had a little business and had customers and orders, and I'll create a database and I'll just store this, just super basic, right? So when I went in for that job in an interview for the telemarketing job, it was going the same way. He's like, "Oh, you don't have any experience." At the very end, he goes, "Do you have any experience with databases?" And I said, "Oh, let me tell you about this project that I'm doing at home. I set up this database and like all this stuff." And then he's like, "Oh, you're hired." So me creating my own experience got me the job. And then I didn't love that. It was just that programming in Clipper for a telemarketing people is not a great, thing. So I decided to, I'm like, the internet was new at that time. So I'm like, I got to learn HTML. So yes, I taught myself HTML. And then what happened? An opportunity came on just months later, and I was prepared. So I think the key principle there is always being proactive about things, because you can miss an opportunity if you're not prepared for it, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think it's a super valuable lesson where I created my own work experience, or sometimes I tell people, go work for free at a place just to be able to say, I've worked in this industry or I have this experience. And you'll also find in the workplace, and I found this because I was a student at the same time that I was growing a startup. And what I realized is that what I learned in my classes was just scratching the surface of what really happens in real life. And I learned so much more in real life than I did in my classes. So that I'm not saying don't take classes, take the classes, those are great, but you can learn so much more out of real life experience than
Yeah, and if you have two fresh out of college students that are applying for a job as a business owner, as a startup founder, I recommend that you look for what they've done to prove their passion and interest in the work that you're going to have them do.
Yes.
Over good grades and really good project work. If they only have examples of project work and they don't have examples of other work that they enjoy doing, I'd steer clear of them, because they're going to do whatever you tell them to do and that's it. And they're not going to be very creative. The person that has passion for this stuff and is self-motivated to just go learn it on their own, they're the one you want on your startup team.
Exactly. And that's a great principle. Over the years, as we hired hundreds and hundreds of people, I would look for those kinds of things. When people would come, especially in the technology industry, when resumes would come across my desk, and then a person would come into me to interview, I really did not care at all what their education was. On technology jobs, I should say, right? I wanted to see, there were people who were high school dropouts that I hired because they were like, well, I set up the server in my basement and I'm doing this and this and this. And I'm like, awesome. And there's another guy that I turned down that had graduated with a computer science degree. And when I quizzed him on anything, all he had was project work, and he really didn't know the stuff. So when I asked him more in-depth questions, well, how does this work? Or what does this do? I'm like, all he's done is the homework. He doesn't really even know how this stuff works. So I hired a high school dropout over a college graduate in an example, because of exactly what you're talking about, right? And
Yes.
So looking at what they do on their own time and what they do is a big telling story, right? And so
Absolutely. So Dan, it was called, I think, Direct Connect, and
Yes.
you got a portion of ownership in Direct Connect, or
yes, Direct Connect. Yep. And
okay.
so then,
And so what percentage, by the way, did he give you?
so the owner of this company is just a single owner. He offered each of us 4 young guys 8% each for doing that, right? So then we're like, okay, great. So let's do this. So then we came up with the idea. We're like, we need something more scalable. These one-off custom e-commerce jobs, I mean, all they do is pay the bills, right? We charge this guy $5,000. We charge this guy $10,000. And that's all great, but all it does is just pay the bills. It doesn't scale to making a lot of money, right? So we saw that free web hosting market taking off, right? And we're like, well, we do web hosting as part of what we do. We're like, we think we can do that better, because at the time, if you went and got a free little page on GeoCities, you would get, your URL would be geocities.com/some neighborhood/some username/some number. It was this big long thing where how could you share that with anybody? How could anybody know unless they clicked a link to that? So we were the very first ones to invent free hosting on subdomains. So we registered the domain freeservers.com, and we got that. We also registered some of the very last 2-digit .com domains that were ever available. So we registered one called 8M. So the number 8 and the letter M. And all we wanted was something really short that then people could put their name in front of that, right? And that could be their page. So then I could dan.freeservers.com or dan.8m.com, And that could be my page instead of this long thing. And then I could share that way easier with people. So we created
the
that.
smallest of innovations there. This is like the
yeah.
shortest. Like it's not that. And GeoCities could have just innovated and done that themselves, but you guys
we were the very
ones
first
that say,
to do
hey,
it.
that's
Yes.
dumb the way they're doing it. Let's go do it a
Right.
better
We
way,
just look
right?
at it and say, well, that's kind of poopy the way they're doing it. Let's make it better. So we did the same thing, but better. But then also when we did it, we didn't realize, why they were doing it that way is because there was a ton of architectural problems back in the technology back in those days. See, if people are working on stuff nowadays, they would even be like, oh, that's so easy to do. But back then, Apache didn't support it, or DNS didn't support it. So we actually we got started with that. We made it work. And then everything started crashing. As soon as we started, all of a sudden we were like, whoa, we got 2,000 people. Oh, we got 5,000 people. Oh, this isn't, and so we had to use like bind back then. We got to the point on DNS where the subdomains had to go into the DNS server, right? So it could resolve to a certain place. And the DNS server would take so long to load, it couldn't refresh. And so you'd be like, well, here's 500 new ones. And then it's like, I got to load all these now. And then the DNS server so it wasn't scalable. And so we had to create our custom versions. We had to hack the source code for bind. We had to hack Apache because Apache wasn't built to do it. And so we had to hack all these systems together to make the system work. So we had a lot of lessons that we had to learn. We were just four guys, innocent and like naive, really helped us out to be like, we'll just do this. And then it was all of a sudden, it's breaking. This doesn't work. And then in startup, one of the most critical elements is you're going to find obstacle after obstacle after obstacle in a startup. How good are you at resolving those obstacles? Because in every story I'll tell you, we hit major obstacles to where we could have just been done and out of business. But then we just put our heads down. There's got to be a way to do this. And you just figure it out, right? So we figured out, we came up, I won't get into the technical details of how we did that. We came up with some super innovative things that were amazing at the time, but it's just guys just trying to be open-minded and coming up with fantastic ideas. So needless to say, we made it scalable, and we made it so scalable that it's scaled up to more than 2 million free websites that we had. And so the revenue from that came in terms of, it came from ads mostly, because on the free website, you place an ad, right? But we were making actually really good money from that. And then the main owner, he decided to put the company up for sale. He's like, wow, this is taking off. This is growing super fast. So we launched it in the summer of 1998, I think, and we sold it in December of 1999. So it was only about a year and a half. And
very uncommon that it all happens that fast.
Yeah. And we sold it for $40 million to about.com. And
8% of $4 million when you're still in your early mid-20s.
Yeah. And I had gotten diluted a little bit because, they brought some investors on towards the end because they needed some money because we were growing so fast. But still, like, here I was, a BYU student. I was living in my parents' basement because we were really poor, and I was making $15 an hour. And then suddenly I get this Merrill Lynch paperwork saying that I'm worth $3 million. And I'm like, what the heck? I'm like, I don't feel rich because it was an all stock deal. So it was tied up in the stock. Right.
Okay.
And so, unfortunately, the timing of that sale then was that in 2000, the stock market started to crash, and they bought at an all-time high of their stock. It was $105 a share. And then we were locked out from selling. And so it took some time. So then it started dropping and dropping and dropping. So needless to say, I didn't get 3 million out of it, but I was able to make really great money out of it because we started selling when we could, and then we go down, we could sell some more, we'd sold. And so we did well from that. And it really helped fast forward. You're in your mid-20s and you're able to then buy your own house and pay cash for cars and buy furniture and like get your life started, right? So it was a huge thing. And then I, of course, was working at the company that then bought us, that I became a director level person in that company, about.com. And, things were going good. But then I think this is probably valuable to share too. So then in 2001, the financial markets, for those who weren't alive, really started to get really bad, especially if you were in advertising related things. And then it was in September 11th of 2001 when we had the Trade Center bombings and everything. And it was just all-time rock bottom at that point. And
the dot-com bubble had burst.
The dot-com bubble had absolutely burst. And so what happened is our little division of about.com, where we were doing free service and all of that, we had grown to about 70 employees. So then on September 13th, 2 days after the September 11th attacks, and where everybody was just utterly depressed, and they felt like the tech industry just came to a halt after that. And then the about.com executives came to me and they said, okay, we are laying off 3/4 of the staff and we're putting you in charge, and you guys have to turn this around, and you have to be EBITDA neutral by the end of the year. In other words, you got to get to profitability by the end of the year or we're shutting the whole thing down. And I was like, whoa, this
no pressure.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, in the meantime, we had free servers with ad pages, but we had this upgrade where we had free servers plus, where you could pay like $5 a month. You could have the ads removed. You got a little more space and stuff like that. So we had some subscribers, but there wasn't very many. And our advertising revenue went from like $1 million a month to like $20,000 a month in like overnight, right? Because of the crash in the market. So I sat down and I'm like, well, actually what we could do is we could just convert more of these free paid accounts. Why don't we build some more features? Why don't we support some more traditional hosting features? Add FTP, maybe add a site builder, add these other things. And then we could have 3 subscription packages and we could get more people to move up into those subscription packages. Let's remove a feature or 2 from the free, still have the free. But so this is like freemium model before freemium was really much of a thing. We perfected the freemium model. So I presented to everybody. I'm like, guys, we can do this. Like we just need to do this. So we cranked on that. We created new features. We did all of it and it was great. At the end of the year, we ended up with $2.5 million in EBITDA and positive profit. And
wow,
for the overall New York-based company, they named me Employee of the Year because they're like, wow, what a turnaround. It was amazing. But it wasn't, wasn't me so much. It was the team. We all executed. We just had a great team that everybody was just executing on everything. But it was recognizing the opportunity, figuring out a plan, and then just go on that plan and staying focused. One key principle in a startup is you have to have a strategy and a plan and something that works, and you've got to execute on that. It's so easy to get distracted with multiple things. And I used to talk to my guys about putting a single quarter in a vending machine, right? Like going, hey, let's put a quarter in this vending machine, in this vending machine. I'm like, you never get anything out. It would be far better to put all of your quarters in one vending machine and just get one thing, right? And so you had a question about that, but that's
my question, Dan, is you executed. I think execution's huge, but what were some of the things that turned the dial from a sales perspective that actually drove the sales? Because I think that's where so many entrepreneurs go. I have a good idea and I'm willing to work and execute, but I don't know what to do to get the sales. How do I drive revenue? And it sounds like you were figuring out how to do that by what you were creating that was something the market really desired. But how did you help the market know it existed to sell to them?
Right. Well, we had the luxury. We were really lucky that we had built up a huge free base, right? So 2 million people. So we had a massive free base. And so we were able to market to our base, as well as we changed all the people who are coming to free servers who had heard about it. Oh, now they come and they see, oh, there's a free, but there's also a basic and a standard and a pro plan. And they got all these different features. So part of it was building the features that people wanted and needed. And then the other thing was finding, like, in freemium, there's this critical dial that you've got to get right, where free has to be useful and good enough that people would be like, yeah, I'm using this for free, but not so good that they wouldn't have any reason to ever pay for it. And so you're trying to tweak that dial to get it just right to where it's like, yeah, I'm using the free. Well, now, gosh, I really like, yeah, the other stuff would be great. I'm willing to pay for that. So that's the tricky part in freemium, is getting that dial right. Sometimes you see companies.
Freemium's the model of you give away something to get them as a user with the hopes that you can upsell them into a paid package later. Freemium.
Exactly. But getting that dialed in and exactly right and tuned is critical in a freemium model. Sometimes you make the mistake of just giving way too much away for free and nobody wants to pay for anything. Or sometimes you give so little for free, people download it, they start using it and they're just like, well, this isn't that great. You're like, well, the paid version might be cool, but this version is just dumb, So you've got to find that right mix. And then at every step of like, well, this pro user is probably a business, so they probably need these features. And they would be willing to pay more. So let's move this feature to over here, right? And so that's what we did. And then we were messaging our users also saying, hey, you're a free user. We have these other packages. And by the way, these 2 features that are available and free are going away on this date. So if you need these still, then please upgrade to one of our other, packages or something. So we did a lot of that. And we had already built up a big reputation, and we also did some other sneaky good things too. On our free websites, we had an banner ad, but underneath it, we put like powered by free servers, right? A link so people could click that. You often see that in certain apps today. Maybe a scheduling app powered by Calendly or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Then somebody else is using it, and then you could even brand it for them, but you're still getting some brand awareness for you too, right? So that's powerful. Plus, the other thing that we did is we made it a link. So it gave us all of these subdomains. It gave us this massive link power. So we had SEO. I remember it was so hilarious. So we had an SEO expert, somebody who built an SEO company, come in and meet with us. This was now in later, when we had already sold the company and we were a lot bigger. I think it was like 2002 or 3. And he's like, we ran an analysis on your SEO and you guys have the best SEO we have ever seen. And he's like, we think it's worth millions of dollars, your SEO. So we can't do anything to help you guys. And it was mostly because we had created all those links. Yeah, here's all for those search engines at that time. Here's millions of websites, little websites linking to these guys, freeservers.com. And so it worked out great for us, right? So that was a little trick that we did that we didn't realize how important it would be, right? Later.
Sure.
Okay. Taking a quick break from the episode. Sorry to interrupt, but I have to take a second and thank the great team at Pod Allies that helps me produce this podcast. Startups with Stu is not an easy undertaking. It takes a lot of work and team power to get this thing done. So the team I use for my podcast, podallies.com, go check them out if you are considering a podcast. If you've thought you have a dream for a show and you want to go make it happen, go to podallies.com and book a strategy call today. I promise you won't regret it. Speaking of the show or shows, let's get back to Startups with Stu in this episode. Forgive my interruption, but if you're interested, go check out podallies.com.
Then what? What happens next? Because I think free servers becomes purchased by about.com. You're with about.com.
Yeah, we're with about.com. And about.com then, and we were a great part of about.com for a couple of years. Then a company called Prime Media was a media company. They bought About.com. And so then when they looked at our division, they're like, well, this web hosting thing, this kind of doesn't fit so much within, let's carve this guys out and let's sell it to somebody else. So they carved our division out and they sold it to United Online, which was the Juno Net Zero guys. So if you ever were in the days of free internet back in the day, we were part of Juno Net Zero and they wanted to do web hosting. So we were part of that company for a while. And we just kept expanding our offering, and they acquired some other companies. We did some good things there. And then it was in 2005 when my buddy, Matt Heaton, who had started Bluehost, we were playing ping pong one day because we play ping pong like once a week. And he's like, oh, and I tell him how frustrated I was being part of this big, huge public company. I'm like, we can't get anything done. Like I have all these ideas. We could do this and this. And I'm like, a committee of people have to decide. And I go to Los Angeles and I go to present. 3 people are already super excited, but inevitably 1 or 2 people go, well, let's think about that. And let's think about that is get nothing done. Right. And so I'm like, this is ridiculous. I just want to do things. I want to grow. I want to get things done. And so he's like, well, Bluehost is starting to take off. I really need somebody to run that. So after a ping pong game, we talked, and then he hired me as the chief operating officer of Bluehost. And I came over when I was the 20th employee. So pretty early. And I got some ownership inside of Bluehost properties, which we started some other brands. Host Monster and Fast Domain also were ours. The reason why we started multiple brands was because a couple of different reasons. One is, with the multiple brands, we could have slightly different pricing strategy and slightly different targeting. But then the biggest reason was our primary marketing vehicle with Bluehost and its properties was affiliates. And the biggest affiliates inside of the web hosting industry were top 10 lists, right? So they'd be like, oh, we reviewed all the hosting companies and here's the 10 best hosting companies, right? And so over time, we started these couple other brands because then we were like, oh, Bluehost number 1, Host Monster number 2, Fast Domain number 5. So then we start to be like Procter & Gamble. I don't know if you know, when you go to buy detergent and you walk down the aisle and you're looking at Tide and all these different brands, like 75% of them are owned by the same company, right? And so they're like, we don't care if you choose that one or that one. Like you're still buying us, right? And so that was beneficial to us in that market space under those circumstances. It helped us to have multiple brands. Plus, sometimes somebody might have a bad experience, like on Host Monster or something. They're like, that's it. I hate you guys. I'm switching to Bluehost. We'd be like, okay. Like, you're going to be in the same data center on the same server. You're okay. So it helped us that way too, right? And so then our primary focus with Bluehost and Host Monster Fast Domain was affiliate marketing. So we got really good at affiliate marketing. And there, towards the end of my time there, we were spending $2.8 million a month on affiliates that we would pay out. So our marketing budget was over $30 million a year. We didn't get into TV or print or radio or anything else. We did some PPC kind of stuff, but it was mostly affiliate marketing. Now, here's something, I think this is an important lesson that people would appreciate, okay? Think about this.
Tell us.
We were charging $7.95 a month for web hosting, okay? Our average affiliate payout was $65 that we would pay them upfront. Thanks for sending us a paying customer. Here's $65. Okay. We had some affiliates we were paying $120 for a $7.95 customer. Okay. We never raised any capital to grow this business and we were profitable. So how does that math work? Right.
Lifetime value of the customer, baby.
Yes. But there's a super tricky part. And this is a startup principle so first of all, like there's lots of great startups that raise a lot of money and grow and create a lot of value and sell. I personally don't love that model because it's so much pressure. You take other people's money and you're not profitable the whole time. And you're just like, oh, now we got to go raise another round. Now we got to go raise another round. And so, but it's not so much about profits on the book from an accrual standpoint. It's about cash flow positive as a startup. So we were only charging $70.95 per user. And not only that, we would go spend $2,000 on getting a new server to load another 500 people on. So we have to output all of this money up front. So how did we do it? Well, what we did was we made sure we were cash flow positive. So it was $7.95 for a month. But what we did is we pretty much had everybody incentivized to where you would pay for a year in advance or 2 years in advance, right? So then $7.95 for 1 year in advance was $94.580, right? If I remember right. And so we got $95 up front, right? Or if you paid for 2 years and it came to $166 something, whatever, I can't remember the exact prices. So we were collecting all of that money up front to be able to, because most of our expenses were up front, right? So even though we were charging $7.95 a month, or if you pay for 2 years, you got it for $6.95 a month, we were collecting 1 or 2 years or 3 years in advance. So our average ticket coming in was $120. Well, now you're like, oh, now I get $120 on average per customer. I pay out $60 on average for customers to affiliates, right? And then the huge thing for us is we built such a great product and we did such a great job. 50% of our customers, new customers, came to us with no paid marketing whatsoever. They just came as pure referrals, probably because people had a great experience with us and they would say, oh, who do you host with? I want to do a website. Oh, I host with Bluehost. They're awesome. Just go use them, right? And so that helped the math a ton, right? So now you've got, okay, well, now we've got collecting the cash up front. Now we have cash to buy servers. Now we have cash to pay the affiliates, because also we delayed the affiliate payouts just a little bit, right? So the affiliates were paid like on the 15th of the following month. So you would accrue everything in a month, and then 15 days later you would get paid for that, right? And so the affiliate model is great too, because you're only paying for successful signups, right? You're not paying, I paid $5,000 for this radio ad and, oh, it did nothing. Or this influencer mentioned us, but we got no signups from it, right? And we paid all this money. So affiliates are great that way, because you only pay out if you actually got them as a paying customer. And we also had a policy that and actually, now that I'm remembering, we actually delayed the payment 60 days. Yeah, not 30 days. And so if anybody canceled within that first period, then we would deduct that. So we had a dashboard for the affiliates. They could see, oh, I've got 10 signups. I've earned $650. Then they might see a negative one because somebody canceled. Oh, now I've only got 9. Oh, but now I got 5 more new ones. And then we would eventually pay out, right? And so, so that helped with the cash flow. So we did so many things to help with the cash flow that we didn't need to raise money, even though we were buying tons of servers up front. We had huge capital costs. We had huge affiliate costs up front, but we were collecting the money up front. So then we got super profitable over time as accounts renewed, because we had no more affiliate costs, no more server costs, because we had already bought them. And so then our costs were pennies per user, but up front they were very expensive. But we collected the money up front. So that helped the math work for us to grow and be profitable. Profitable not from an accrual standpoint, like if you would spread out the revenue of the users over time, but we were cash flow positive, profitable from the start. And so that really helped us a ton. And we took off and we grew super fast with those affiliates, right?
Always asking yourself how you're solving for cash flows is so critical. And one way to solve for it is you take investor money and you invest that investor money to acquire the customers. And this is a much better way if you can make it work.
Yeah. Think about the cash flow model of how you can make that work, of heavily incentivizing people. So the new golf app that I'm building, yeah, I'm using the same principles, right? I'm going to use an affiliate program, and I'm going to use a subscription model, and I'm going to have a monthly, but I'm going to heavily incentivize the year subscription, right? By giving like half off the monthly if you go with the year price, because number one, it's better for you to have the app for a year for your improvement and everything. But number two, then I get that cash flow up front to be able to pay for the affiliates and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Trying to reuse that principle.
And your cost from an accrual perspective, as you mentioned, that's an accounting word that means we took $100 for the year, or let's say $120 for the year.
Yeah.
We get to count $10 every month as the revenue for the business, not the 120 all up front. We get to count it $10 per month at a time.
Yeah.
As we deliver. But if what it takes to deliver is so little over that long window of time, then it's no big deal that you take the money and use it right up front, because even though you account for it and you need to make sure you're able to take care of that customer over time, you get to enjoy the benefits of the cash right now. So I love it. I think that's great.
Yeah. So that was the secret sauce that we used to grow really fast with our affiliate program, to be able to make the economics work that we didn't require outside financing. And then as renewals kicked in, then those customers are heavy profits, and we just kept getting more profitable and more profitable and more profitable. And so it was awesome. So we grew to 2010 is when we ended up selling Bluehost. And at that point, we had grown to, I think we had about 250 employees. We were 65 million in revenue. I remember that. And we were doing about 25 million in profit at that point per year.
My goodness. So you were already paying yourself a good chunk of money. Yeah. Every year.
No, it's great. It's awesome if you can get to that profitable standpoint. I mean, so many tech startups they're never profitable, and they're just waiting. I know guys that's really successful tech startups. I mean, they're making a good salary now because they're big and everything, but they're waiting for that equity payout of when the company sells or goes public, right? And in the meantime, we were so profitable that the bank account fills up at the end of the month, and you're like, just divvy out to the owners, and then we let it fill up again, and then divvy it out, and then you're making way more money than what your salary is, right, at that point. And so it's really fantastic that way if you can build a company with that kind of cash flow. But not every company is designed to be able to build that way, right? And so, but we were able to do it. Subscription models really lend themselves well to that if you can build out the cash flows right. And if you can have your costs under control. We were super cost conscious on everything that we did. And we built efficiencies in. To give you an example, so we sold a company to Endurance International Group. They bought us. The original founders left, and I stayed around for another 4 years, and I took over as CEO of all the Bluehost brands. And then at one point, they bought another web hosting company, HostGator. And when they bought them, they were about the same size as us. And when they bought them, they had twice as many employees for the same amount of revenue. That just showed you how efficient our tools, because we built all of these tools in. We just had efficiency in mind. It was on our brain. Like we were like, well, this is dumb. Why does this require a person to do this? We can program this. Like back in the day, a perfect example was every hosting company, if you wanted an SSL certificate so you could have a secure page, right, on take a credit card or something, back in the early days, you had to submit a request. A support person would say, okay, I'm going to create a signing request. Now you have to respond to this. And then the support person has to go back, and then they had to install it on the server, right? So it would take a person would take communication back and forth between the customer and a person, and then somebody would have to manually install it. So that's a lot of work. So we fully automated. We were the first company that I know of to ever fully automate an SSL certificate. So ours was just like, oh, you want one? Okay, we'll generate a CSR. Boom. Okay, give us your payment. Okay, boom. Your certificate's installed, rebooting. Okay, done. You're ready. And so we did so many things like that saved human work and saved cost, right? So we had half the number of employees of a hosting company that was equivalent in revenue, right?
And I believe you guys are the ones that made it super easy if you were going to build a WordPress website, to choose Bluehost as your host and move forward, right? I don't think WordPress was not, they were host agnostic.
Exactly.
But you guys made it really easy for a WordPress customer to choose to use Bluehost, right?
And there's some valuable lessons in that with WordPress. So, that was one of the reasons why our affiliate program was so valuable, was because we hitched our wagon to WordPress, right? We saw WordPress was taking off and rapidly becoming the most popular, content management system. So we ended up building out special tools on our platform to make it super easy with a one-click. We were the first company to have a one-click install of WordPress onto your hosting. You didn't have to, because everybody else would have to be like, you could download it for free and then you had to know how to install it. And so if you're a beginner user, you're like, I don't know how to do this, right? So we made it one-click button, install onto your hosting account. And then as we built all these special tools and we developed a great relationship with Matt Mullenweg and WordPress, and said they also became a huge affiliate for us. And we paid them way more money than what we would pay the normal affiliates. But also think about the what do you call it? The aura effect of, wait, WordPress has Bluehost listed. Then you go to other affiliates and you say, hey, Mr. Top 10 list, WordPress thinks we're the best web hosting company. They have some others on there. Why don't you list us, right? So it's worth paying as a super affiliate like that. I would call them a super affiliate because of the halo effect that you can get onto other people and leverage it in that way, right? So the customers that WordPress sent us directly were not as profitable for us, right? Because we were paying them a lot more money. But there's this halo effect that people are like, wait, if WordPress is promoting those guys, maybe I should promote them, right? And so, and those guys then were regular affiliates, we're paying less money to our standard affiliate fees, right? So that's another important principle, that if you do the affiliate model, is there somebody that you can hitch your wagon to? Can you make it work really well with their software? Can you then work out an affiliate relationship so to where you can then get a halo effect of, I'm going to do with my newest startup, I'm going to try to do that same thing, try to hitch it. And then you can be like, hey, this guy, or this company's promoting us. And it's so much easier to get other people at that point, right?
Yeah, that's genius. There are so many great takeaways just from listening to Dan's story, you guys. So Dan, let's do a couple fast round questions. I know we're running out of time here. When you've invested in some startups, what do you look for? What are the, let's say, top 3 things you look for when deciding if you're going to make an investment in a startup?
So, I have invested in startups. I'm also a member of several funds like Album Ventures and stuff. And it's great that there are some resources like that for early stages. The things that I personally look for is, what problem are you trying to solve, right? And how big of a pain point is it, right? It's not enough just to be something cool. Like in order for people to, parting with money is painful, right? For anybody, no matter how rich you are. So
you better be solving for a bigger pain point.
Exactly. So, and some things surprised me. Like, to be honest, I would have never thought that DoorDash would be so popular, because when you look at it, I guess people don't think about it so much. When you order something on DoorDash, you're paying 20 to 30% more than just driving through the drive-through. But the convenience of not having to leave your house and everything, I just never realized that how worth an extra 30% would be to people, and it's like, wow, that's amazing. I mean, it's a massive company, but that was a pain point. Like, it's the convenience of, you mean I can sit here and just keep watching the game and then food can come to me? Oh, I'll pay 30% more for that, you know? And on the surface idea of that I would have thought, well, yeah, maybe for guys that have a lot of money, but no, just about everybody like uses DoorDash. So yeah, what's the pain point that you're solving? And if I was looking to a startup, you've got to find a way to get your idea to a proof of concept enough to where you can actually start generating revenue and prove that it's going to work. There's just too many things that on paper look amazing. And then in all practicality, it's like nothing. And that's why, what is it? I don't know what the statistic is. 80 to 90% of startups fail, right?
Yeah.
And so I personally, I don't invest in just ideas. Like I would only
Show me
invest.
the traction.
Yes. Show me some traction. Show me a little bit of traction. Like Podium is a great example, right? Like I'm an investor in Album Ventures 1, and they were a Podium or Album Ventures, which was Peak Ventures back then, invested in them. And Jeff Birmingham, who was running it at the time, called me when I was at Bluehost and said, hey, can you interview this guy, Eric and Dennis, and see what their thing is? And they were smart enough that they didn't just have an idea. With their limited skills, they had built enough of an application that they had it working. And then they gone out to car dealerships and they had already generated some revenue. So they were already making traction and proved, yeah, people want this. It works, right? And so then that makes a huge difference in you being able to get money and raise money for your startup. If you can show actual, I'm making money versus this is a really cool idea, it's going to be great. And, there's a huge difference between that. That's a chasm. That isn't a little step up. It's a chasm of you go from looks really cool in mock-ups to no, something, even if it's really simple and limited in its functionality, but it's good enough that people start using it and you're generating money. That's huge. It's
the value of that first paying customer is so massive. And so finding those first users that are willing to pay you goes a long way in helping get investors excited, because they say, hey, people see value in this besides the person that's deciding to build it, right?
Yes,
I like that.
Yeah. So to me personally, I wouldn't invest in anything that didn't show a little traction. And then when you can get a little bit of that hockey stick traction, which is where your revenue is not just going up incrementally like this, but all of a sudden you start going up like this, then that's when it becomes really easy to raise revenue, because then everybody wants in. Then then it's really easy to get to raise some capital if you want. So,
so what keeps you motivated now, Dan? You've been out of the need to really drive and grind hard, but you're starting a startup again, a golf app, which is super cool.
Right. Right. So for me, I mean, for a while, I wasn't super motivated. People would say, yeah, I became an investor. I was doing some mentoring and some other things. But I worked with a good friend of mine and the founder of Bluehost we built a little IP leasing business, because I'm like, oh, this is easy to do and it generates good cash flow. But the whole grind and do something hard, I was like, I just wasn't motivated to do anything like that. And people are, you've done 20 years of web hosting. You should do a new web hosting company. I'm like, oh, I'm never doing web hosting again. Like, that's so hard. And it's such a cutthroat industry. And it's really competitive. And there's a lot of technical challenges. And I know all the problems that can happen. Sometimes not knowing the problems helps, because then you're like, I'll just dive in. What could go wrong?
Oh, yeah.
What could go wrong, right?
The greatest superpower of most entrepreneurs is their naivety, right?
Exactly. So there's no way I would do web hosting again. It's just not worth it. So for me, what happened was with the golf stuff, I just got into golf myself. And then so golf for me is really a fun hobby. So when I'm working at a business around it, it's like also fun at the same time, right? And then I looked at it and I said, well, first of all, I saw such a huge need. For example, so the golf app that I'm building is a golf improvement app. And I went from a 25 handicap down to a 5 handicap, and I didn't even think that was possible. And in the golf industry, there's even an article I found where this golf pro came out and said the average golf score in the United States is still 100, and it has been for 50 years the same. Because even though equipment's gotten way better, courses have gotten better, like all of this stuff, and he's like, and the pros have all gotten better, but the regular guy hasn't gotten better. And there's scientific principles as to why. And then I looked around and I tested my theory. Like I put an ad in on KSL, said free golf lessons. It had like 10 people. I'm like, okay, that's enough. And I taught them, and I'm like, just a few principles, and every single one of them immediately got better. And I'm like, this could work. So why not put this, like nobody's doing this. Why not put it into an app that could really help people learn how to practice and learn and go through this improvement cycle? So that got me excited because one, golf is fun, and two, so it's almost like playing. And then two is I saw a huge need where I've always thought taking technology to a non-technical industry, it can really give you some advantages, right? You see that. You see certain like Filevine, a local company, and I'm an investment through them, through the fund. They're legal software company. The legal industry, not a tech company. They built this great tech for legal offices, and they're killing it. They're growing like crazy, right? So when you can bring technology into a non-technical industry and you can do it right, you have some real chances for success, I think.
This has been super enlightening for me. I love this stuff. I could talk to you all day, Dan. It'd be fun to have a part 2 at some point with you. I know your time's precious, and I appreciate you giving it to us and helping us out as we all continue on our fun entrepreneurial journeys. If you were to give one last piece of advice to any, let's say one of your children comes to you and is like, Dad, what does it take to become a successful entrepreneur? What advice would you have for them?
So we talked about several principles here, and I'm relearning some of these principles as I'm doing a startup again for the first time. One of the things that I'm learning too is you can't be afraid to make the critical right decisions. One thing that happens once you build a business, you get going. If you've read Good to Great, it talks about the flywheel. Once you get momentum going, it's interesting because it's like you become a bigger and bigger ship, and it's harder. So it becomes harder to change. It's also harder to mess up, right? And you've got a lot of momentum. But in a startup, you can literally crash and burn on one bad decision, right? And so don't be afraid to make hard decisions. Like here's one quick example, right? I don't have app experience, and we're building multiple apps. I got a lot of web experience. So we're developing all this stuff. I've got programmers, but I don't have app programmers. So I find somebody like out of India, they're cheap. I'm like, okay, great. And they're building this app. And then then it got to the point where I'm like, oh man, these guys are great for building a simple app, like a WordPress site, but I need something far more complex and far more difficult. And rather than and I talked to them and everything, but it became clear, like they didn't have the skill set. And even though they were saying, oh yeah, we can do that. Oh yeah, we can do that. They were taking way too long on certain things. They were struggling to do certain things. They're saying some things aren't possible. When I said, oh yeah, this app over here does it, And so then I'm like, all right, critical decision. I'm firing this team, and we've got to just find our own programmers. And I was really worried because I'm like, how in the heck am I going to find programmers so fast? And I put like a job on LinkedIn, a post. I found 2 programmers out of South America immediately. I hired him within 3 days. I was holding on to the India guys because I'm like, well, they're cheap, and maybe I can just make this work. And then I'm like, nope, this is time to course correct. we're going to crash into the side of the mountain, or I can like turn and we can have a chance of keep going and making this, right? And so ditching that team and making a hard decision. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions. Sometimes you might bring on a partner who's like a good friend and they're just not qualified to do it. And then you're like, man, I got to make a hard decision. Or, I made another hard decision this last week. We were building 2 apps on 2 platforms to reach everybody, Android and iOS. I'm like, you know what? No, first, we're only going to build on iOS first. And then when we get iOS done, then we'll build Android. But we got to get to a launch point. That's the critical thing. You just got to you got to tighten and narrow your focus so that you can have an execution that you can get done and go. Leave out features for future versions. Just get mega focused so that you can get launched, and then you could always make it better, right? But
yes,
that's so hard in a startup. It's so easy. Oh, I got this awesome idea. Let's do this, and get distracted and do all these things. No, narrow your focus. Put it on a future features thing, right? Don't forget about it, but focus and get something done and then make it better, and don't be afraid to make a hard decision when something's not working. You got to course correct fast or you're going to crash.
There you have it, folks. Wisdom preached over and over again. Great lessons from Dan Handy today. Dan, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate you taking the time to join. And with that, we'll give this episode a wrap. Please go take your startup to the moon. And thanks for listening to another episode of Startups with Stu.
Hey, founders, entrepreneurs, investors, and other listeners of Startups with Stu. Thank you for listening to this episode today. As I mentioned at the beginning, as I mentioned in the middle, I want to take a second again at the end and say, if you haven't yet and you're considering a podcast, go check out podallies.com. They sure help me a lot with the show. And I am so grateful for all that they do to help me accomplish Startups with Stu and get it out to the world so we can help more founders and take your startup to the moon. Go check out podallies.com and podup.com if you're interested in podcasting at any level.
Thanks for joining me on Startups with Stu. We have big goals to help millions of entrepreneurs. If you enjoyed this show, please take a minute to share it with someone else that needs to hear it, or leave a review. Remember, success is within reach for those who dare to dream big and take action. Until next time, keep pushing forward on your entrepreneurial journey.